It was supposed to be a quiet drive routine, forgettable. The kind that faded into the pine-lined backdrop of northern Alabama and disappeared without consequence. The air was thick with mid-morning humidity, the kind that clung to the windshield in a ghostly mist, as Major General Olivia Dawson steered her black government-issued sedan along County Road 31 just past mile marker 52. The road snaked through Deer Hollow, a town so small it barely registered on GPS, tucked between forgotten Civil War markers and shuttered bait shops. To Olivia, it was just a patch of land between where she'd been and where she needed to go, a classified strategy briefing at Redstone Arsenal 2 hours east. She'd made this kind of trip dozens of times in her 3-decade career. No convoy, no flags on the hood, just the quiet dignity of rank. Hidden beneath plain clothes, tan slacks, a navy windbreaker, and her mother's cross necklace resting just above her heart. She preferred it this way. No salutes, no questions. Just the road and her purpose. Her secure government-issued phone resting in the cup holder like a loaded weapon began to blink red signal loss. Olivia's brows furrowed. She was on a live encrypted call with a senior liaison from the Department of Defense, real-time movements, threat levels, names that didn't belong on any civilian frequency. She tried to drive another half-mile, praying for a hill or signal tower to cut through the static, but the bars only dropped lower one by one until the screen flashed, reconnecting. She glanced at her watch. She had precisely 6 minutes to complete the call before the server terminated. She needed signal now. That's when she spotted it. Just off the right shoulder, framed by a sagging billboard advertising coldest sodas in Alabama, stood Ben's Market and Fuel. If there was ever a gas station that looked like a memory someone tried to forget, this was it. Dusty, low-roofed paint peeling like sunburnt skin, and 2 crooked pumps that looked like they hadn't seen a tech since Reagan was in office. A single vending machine hummed beside a faded ice chest, its door slightly ajar. Above the glass entrance, the E in open flickered nervously, but it was a dot on the map, and sometimes that was enough. Olivia pulled into the lot, careful not to roll over the deep pothole near Pump 3. She parked along the side, out of view from the storefront, and left the engine running. A few locals stood near a beat-up Ford pickup, laughing, sipping coffee from gas station styrofoam cups. They barely noticed her. She hoped it would stay that way. She grabbed the secure phone, stepped out of the car, and walked a few paces toward the edge of the lot. The pine trees behind her, swaying like sentries in the breeze. Holding the device to her ear, she lifted her chin and spoke calmly into the receiver. Dawson verifying. Code Echo 42. Continue brief. A voice crackled back through the static. Confirmed. Resuming with satellite coordinates operation to begin at 1400 hours. Command requests status update from Phoenix Protocol. As she listened, Olivia instinctively scanned the surroundings with quiet efficiency, left to right, slow, precise, a habit forged from years in theater. It wasn't paranoia, it was discipline. Behind the glass counter inside the store, Betty Rollins squinted from her stool. Betty was 62, white, and full of the kind of suspicions that had been passed down like recipes. She'd been working at Ben's Market for over a decade, and she prided herself on spotting trouble before it caused a mess. She saw it in the way people walked, talked, parked, or didn't say anything at all. And this morning, through her smudged window, she saw a black woman, tall, confident, alone, talking into a black device that didn't look like any phone she'd ever seen. Betty didn't see Major General Olivia Dawson. She didn't see 30 years of distinguished military service. 9 overseas deployments, 3 defense, distinguished service medals, and a Bronze Star earned under fire. She saw a threat. Trouble. Someone not from around here. She reached for the beige rotary phone under the register and dialed slowly. When the dispatcher answered, she lowered her voice, eyes still trained on Olivia. "Hi, yes, I don't know someone out by Pump 2. She's been pacing, talking to herself, acting real strange. Might be on something. Looks like she's casing the place or recording things. Black female, early 50s maybe. Could be dangerous." The dispatcher asked for clarification, but Betty had already hung up. Outside, Olivia continued her call. She hadn't heard the phone inside. She hadn't seen Betty's eyes narrowing through the dusty window. She had no reason to expect anything but 6 minutes of quiet to complete a critical update and be on to her way. But Deer Hollow had other plans. 20 minutes later, the ripple of that 911 call began to move through the ranks of the Deer Hollow Police Department, a 3-person outfit operating out of a red brick building between a church and a feed store. Officer Duke Merritt was the first to respond. Duke was 58, an ex-military man himself, though that hadn't ended with distinction. Dishonorably discharged after a string of alcohol-fueled altercations, he'd returned to Deer Hollow with a chip on his shoulder and a badge he used like a weapon. He still wore his military boots and spoke in clipped commands, but the honor had long since bled out. His partner that morning was Officer Cole Jennings, 25, fresh out of academy, eager and undertrained. He admired Duke more than he understood him. When the call came in, suspicious woman, possibly under the influence near Ben's Market, Duke smirked and tossed his half-eaten biscuit onto the dashboard. "Let's go remind the good people of Deer Hollow why we don't tolerate mess," he muttered. The cruiser tore down the narrow highway lights off tires, spitting gravel at the curves. As they neared the station, Duke turned the lights on for effect. Outside, Olivia noticed the sirens in the distance. Her grip on the phone loosened slightly. The line had gone quiet. Signal dropped again. She sighed and looked toward the approaching vehicle, the flashing lights painting the pine trees red and blue. She didn't move, didn't run, didn't hide. She simply placed the secure phone gently on the hood of her car, stood tall, and waited, her back straight, her hands visible, her calm unbroken. For Major General Olivia Dawson, it was just another deployment. But Deer Hollow was about to make it a battlefield. The bell above the rusted door of Ben's Market jingled softly as Betty Rawlins leaned against the cigarette rack, eyeing the solitary woman outside through a streaked window. Her pale blue eyes narrowed. The woman didn't look like she belonged, not out here in Deer Hollow, not at Ben's, and not on that phone. Betty squinted. It wasn't a normal phone either, bigger, boxier, with a strange blinking green light that pulsed like it was alive. The woman stood near Pump 6. Her head tilted slightly toward the device, her free hand at her side, fingers moving almost imperceptibly, like she was receiving commands from space. "She's talking to someone, all right," Betty muttered to herself, twisting the edge of her apron. "But it ain't who she says it is." The woman, black, tall, poised, had arrived quietly in a dusty silver sedan with government tags. No license plate number Betty recognized. No polite nod when she parked. Just straight to the call. No snacks. No gas. Just business. That was enough to stir Betty's radar. In a town where everyone knew everyone and no one kept secrets for long. A stranger like that didn't just slip by unnoticed. Betty's instincts, honed over 60-some years of raising boys, losing a husband, and managing the quirks of a stubborn town, told her this was no ordinary visitor. She reached for the phone beneath the counter, the one with the coiled cord and grimy buttons. Her voice when she spoke was low and laced with certainty. "Yeah, it's Betty. I'm at Ben's. Got a cool woman out here, acting strange, real twitchy, mumble-talking to herself. Might be high or something, don't know, but she's got something in her hand, could be a device. Just saying you might want to take a look. She hung up before they could ask for more details. Across town, the call landed in the ears of two men who didn't need many reasons to spring into action. Officer Duke Merritt was sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped Marine Corps mug when the dispatcher's voice crackled through the radio. A suspicious individual female, possibly under the influence, acting erratically at Ben's Market. "Let's roll," Duke grunted, slapping the roof of the cruiser as he climbed in. Next to him in the passenger seat was Cole Jennings, fresh out of academy muscles, too tight, eyes too sharp, and a dangerous hunger to prove himself. Cole's knuckles flexed around the radio mic as the cruiser peeled out of the station. "You think it's real?" he asked. "Like meth head or something?" "Don't matter," Duke said flatly. "Call's a call." As the squad car sped down County Road 11, the pine trees blurred past like silent sentries. Duke's face was granite behind his aviators, etched by war and time. He'd done 2 tours in the Gulf, came back with a limp and a chip on his shoulder. What he hadn't found overseas, he now hunted in his own town. Control, certainty, the sense that he still mattered. And nothing threw that balance off more than someone who didn't play by his rules. They turned into Ben's Market fast enough to scatter a pair of squirrels on the gravel lot. Olivia Dawson, still deep into her secure call, saw the lights before she heard the engine. She looked up briefly, eyes calm, alert, calculating. She didn't hang up, didn't move. Her voice into the device was even coded. Eagle Actual standing by. Repeating coordinates. Priority Alpha. The 2 officers didn't wait for context. They didn't ask questions. They didn't approach with curiosity or caution. They exited the cruiser like they were storming a bunker. Duke had one hand already brushing the butt of his sidearm. Cole approached at a tight angle. His body coiled, the kind of stance Olivia had seen in too many young summer soldiers who hadn't yet learned the weight of pulling a trigger. "Ma'am," Duke called, voice hard as flint. "Step away from the vehicle, hands where we can see them." Olivia blinked. Once. Slowly. She ended the call, closed the secure device, and placed it gently on the hood of her car. Her palms opened wide in the warm Alabama air. "I'm Major General Olivia Dawson," she said evenly. "Active duty. United States Army. I'm en route to Redstone Arsenal. I stopped to complete a high-security call. If you give me a moment, I can provide my identification." Duke's face didn't change. Cole's brow twitched. General Cole said, cocking his head. "You expect us to believe that I do," Olivia replied. "Because it's the truth." She reached slow, deliberate into her jacket pocket and retrieved her military credentials and travel orders laminated and embossed with the seal of the Department of Defense. She extended them. Duke took the documents, but barely glanced at them before tossing them onto the hood. The movement was dismissive, humiliating. "Fake," he muttered. "Ain't no general out here talking to satellites." Olivia inhaled deeply through her nose. "You're making a mistake." "Funny," Cole said. "That's what the last one said too." Behind the smeared glass of the convenience store, Betty watched arms folded like a warden over a prison yard. The drama had bloomed just the way she'd expected, maybe even hoped. A few customers were gathering by the pumps now, some taking cautious steps closer. One young man raised his phone, recording quietly. "Turn around," Duke ordered. "Now, hands behind your back." "No, sir," Olivia said, her tone a notch firmer. "I'm not resisting. I'm stating that you're violating federal law by detaining a U.S. officer with proper identification." Cole moved first fast, grabbing one of Olivia's arms. Duke followed, snapping the cuffs tight around her wrists. She didn't resist. She didn't plead. But she also didn't lower her eyes. "I suggest you contact your department's supervisor immediately," she said through clenched teeth. "You're compromising national security." Laughter erupted from Duke. "Lady, you really think we buy that?" In that moment, Olivia felt the press of cold steel on her skin, felt the eyes of the crowd, the low whispers, the ever-present gaze that came with her skin, her stature, her silence. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision one made the moment Betty Rawlins saw her and reinforced the second Duke Merritt stepped out of that cruiser. Inside the Pentagon, a secure line had gone dead. Across 3 satellite channels and 2 security levels, alarms were beginning to ring. But in Deer Hollow, Alabama, all that mattered was what people thought they saw. A black woman. A device, a lie they had already told themselves. And so began the reckoning. Major General Olivia Dawson stood still as the first cold click of the handcuffs locked into place, her wrists honed from years of handling classified documents, and battlefield command now pinned behind her like she was a suspect, not a decorated officer in the United States Army. The moment held an unnatural quiet, the kind that comes before a storm or a mistake that cannot be undone. She had offered everything they needed: federal identification, travel orders, and a respectful request for a supervisor. But none of that mattered to Officers Duke Merritt and Cole Jennings. Not out here. Not in a town like Deer Hollow, where perception was more potent than fact, and a black woman alone with a strange device was a threat before she was ever a person. Her secure phone, a matte black encrypted model built for Department of Defense communications, slipped from the hood of her rental car during the scuffle. It hit the pavement with a clatter too loud in the rural silence, its live line still transmitting garbled bits of conversation and escalating background noise straight to the Pentagon's Strategic Command Center. Olivia tried to tilt her body just enough to keep it in her line of sight. But Officer Merritt's hand was firm on her shoulder, forcing her toward the side of the vehicle. "You're not listening," Olivia said calmly. "You're making a critical mistake. That device is live and transmitting." "Lady, what you need to do is shut your mouth," Jennings snapped, ignoring the warning in her voice. "You're this close to obstruction and resisting." She didn't respond. She had learned long ago that there were moments when speaking could cost more than silence, but even silence had its price. The gas station lot had transformed. First, it had just been Betty Rawlins watching from behind the glass like some self-appointed gatekeeper of safety and suspicion. Then it was the man who had just come out for a bottle of Mountain Dew, now lingering by the pumps with his camera phone raised. Then it was 2 teenage girls in a dusty SUV, mouths agape, as they watched the 2 officers press a restrained black woman against her own vehicle. Then the man in hunting gear who stopped mid-step to look, and the woman in scrubs who stood frozen by her car door. A small crowd had formed, quiet but observant. Some were filming. Most were whispering. No one intervened. One woman gasped audibly when Olivia's ID was tossed again onto the gravel, the shiny plastic glinting under the sun before landing near the edge of a puddle. Duke didn't look at it. He didn't care. "Credentials," he muttered with a scoff. "Anyone can laminate a piece of paper these days." Olivia closed her eyes for a second and let the rising flush of heat pass. Her back still straight, her breath controlled. But she could feel it, the quiet undoing of her dignity. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because she was being treated like she had. The sting wasn't the handcuffs. It was the implication. The unspoken verdict from people who hadn't asked a single real question. "You are detaining a federal officer in direct violation of U.S. Code. Title 10, Section 12301, she said quietly, trying once more to appeal to reason, to law, to anything that might reach them. Merritt only chuckled, his weight pressing harder into her shoulder. "Ma'am, you need to quit with the made-up laws before you get yourself in deeper." "I am not making anything up," she replied. "That phone on the ground is still connected to a DoD secure channel. This is no longer a local matter." But the officers were too deep into their assumptions, too committed to the fantasy they had crafted the moment Betty's voice crackled over dispatch. Olivia could feel the history of 1,000 similar moments pressing down on her. She was not the first to be misunderstood, doubted, or dismissed, and she wouldn't be the last. But she had hoped, naively perhaps, that the bars on her shoulders and stars on her resume might protect her from exactly this kind of ignorance. Behind them a voice murmured, "A general." "That can't be." She said it plain, someone else whispered. "Why ain't they checking her ID? Just look at her. That woman's not on drugs. She looks calm. Too calm." But calm was all Olivia had. That, and a training that had taught her how to breathe evenly while missiles screamed overhead and foreign agents leveled accusations dead in her face. Deer Hollow wasn't Iraq, or Kandahar, or the underground bunkers of Stuttgart, but the humiliation felt oddly heavier here. Jennings had begun pacing now, agitated by the growing audience, the phone still recording the murmurs that he couldn't fully understand, but could feel turning against him. Merritt barked at the crowd. "Back it up, people. This is an official law enforcement matter. Disperse, or we'll clear you out," but no one moved. The girl with the phone kept filming her hand, trembling slightly. Back in Washington, D.C., a technician named Alicia Monroe froze when she saw the alert, "Secure line lost. Active connection interrupted." Her eyes darted to the blinking GPS ping from Olivia's device, miles from where she should have been, nowhere near Redstone Arsenal. Her supervisor, Lieutenant Commander Bryce Harlan, stepped in as she stammered out the data. "You said she was where Ben's Market." "Some rural town. Deer Hollow, Alabama." Her line went dead mid-briefing. There was shouting in the background. "Get Strategic Command on the line. And patch in JAG. This is about to get very complicated." In Deer Hollow, Olivia was now seated on the curb, back to the concrete wall, still handcuffed, as if the pause in movement could restore order. Her wrists ached. But it was the weight in her chest that hurt more, the knowledge that even now, even with all she had done, all she had sacrificed, the people in front of her had already decided she was lying. "What's your real name?" Jennings asked, crouching near her. "You already have it," she said evenly, "and your radios are about to confirm it." As if on cue, the police radio on Merritt's shoulder crackled to life. A dispatcher's voice came through tight, urgent, and with a slight tremble. "Unit 3, confirm you have detained a female subject at Ben's Market. Affirmative." Merritt replied. "Subject's uncooperative. We've got her secured." A pause. "Be advised, subject flagged federal. Repeat, flagged federal. Pentagon has initiated emergency contact. You are ordered to release her immediately and await further instruction." The silence that followed was deafening. Olivia looked up at them calmly. Jennings was pale. Merritt's jaw flexed. "I told you," she said, her voice like steel wrapped in silk. "You didn't listen." Merritt mumbled under his breath, fumbling with the keys, unlocking her cuffs with hands that had once been steady enough to carry out sniper drills. Not anymore. Not after this. He didn't meet her eyes. Jennings stood back as if burned. He tried to say something, maybe a justification, maybe a half-hearted apology, but the words never came. Olivia stood slowly, her wrists red and swollen. She didn't move to threaten. She didn't raise her cheery voice. She picked up her device from the gravel, brushed the dirt off the screen, and looked out at the crowd. The young woman with the phone hadn't stopped filming. "You'll regret this," Olivia said softly, not as a threat, but as a truth. And then, just as the tension reached its snapping point, a roar of engines shattered the stillness. A convoy of black SUVs tore into the lot. No sirens, no flashing lights, just urgency dust and the authority of people who weren't asking for permission. Out stepped a team of uniformed personnel from Redstone Arsenal, led by Colonel Jeffrey Lane, a man whose grim expression carried more weight than any weapon. He marched past the frozen officers and straight to Olivia. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low. "Are you hurt?" "Only their careers," she replied. And just like that, the story changed. But the consequences were just beginning. At the Pentagon, a red light blinked on the secure console like a pulse warning of something gone wrong. Lieutenant Marcus Hale, seated in front of a bank of encrypted communication terminals, leaned forward, his brow tightening. He had just lost the audio link to Major General Olivia Dawson mid-briefing a call that should have been routine, uneventful, and secure. Instead, all he heard now was static and distant muffled noise, something like shouting and gravel crunching. Something was off. He toggled the comms channel again. "General Dawson, this is Command Ops. Please verify status." Nothing. Static. Then the line went dead. Colonel Rivers Hale called, his voice clipped but urgent. "We may have a situation." Across the room, Colonel Elaine Rivers, an imposing woman with close-cropped gray hair, and the steely calm of decades in command, rose from her station. "Patch me in," she ordered. Within seconds, the room's main screen lit up with a blinking signal, last known location triangulated off the secure device. A gas station, on the outskirts of a barely marked town in northern Alabama. Deer Hollow. Rivers narrowed her eyes. That's not her route. She was heading to Redstone. What the hell is she doing out there? "She likely pulled over for signal," Hale replied. "The secure line was choppy. She said she needed a stronger connection. That was 2 minutes before the line cut." Colonel Rivers turned to the Joint Rapid Response Coordinator. "I want a Blackbird team in the air. Redstone is closest. Get Colonel Maddox on the horn. He knows Olivia personally. Tell him she may be in hostile territory." The air shifted in the Pentagon's ops center. There wasn't panic, but something colder and urgency sharpened by the knowledge that one of their top generals had gone dark in a part of the country where her rank and race might not protect her. Within minutes, the wheels of federal response were turning at full speed. Clearance codes were entered. Convoys assembled. The line to Redstone went live. Colonel James T. Maddox, Olivia's former commanding officer and longtime friend, answered with the calm of a man used to war zones. But when he heard her name, he stood up straight. "She," what Maddox said sharply. "Where Deer Hollow. Local law enforcement may have detained her." Jesus Christ. 10 minutes later, a convoy of black government SUVs peeled out of Redstone Arsenal tires, hissing over hot asphalt sirens, dark, but speed undeniable. Inside the lead vehicle, Maddox's jaw was set like stone. He had known Olivia Dawson for over 20 years, led her through operations in Kandahar, watched her climb through the ranks with grace and grit. If someone in Deer Hollow had laid hands on her, they were about to learn what federal oversight felt like. Back in Deer Hollow, the scene was surreal. Olivia sat handcuffed on the curb outside Ben's Market, her back pressed against the wall, the secure phone lying cracked on the pavement beside her. Her wrists ached from the too tight metal, but worse was the slow, burning humiliation of being watched, filmed, judged by people who didn't know her name but thought they knew her worth. Officer Duke Merritt leaned casually against the hood of his cruiser, chewing a toothpick like this was nothing more than a traffic stop. Beside him, young Officer Cole Jennings bounced on the balls of his feet, nervous and smug all at once, still convinced he'd bagged a threat. Betty Rawlins, arms folded, stood behind the station window, peering out like a guard at a prison yard. Her face no longer smirking, but grim, uncertain. Even she could sense that something had shifted in the air. It happened like thunder. The roar of engines broke across the horizon. A low rumbling procession of federal SUVs emerged from the tree-lined road like a column of shadows. Tires screeched as they swung into the lot, boxed in the local cruiser's doors, flying open in synchronized urgency. Tactical boots hit gravel. The lead vehicle's door opened, and out stepped Colonel James T. Maddox, tall stern, with a folder tucked under his arm and fury in his walk. "Where is she?" Maddox's voice cracked like a gunshot. Merritt turned, blinking against the sunlight. "And who the hell are Maddox?" cut him off, stepping forward, with two other armed federal officers flanking him. "I'm Colonel James Maddox, acting liaison for the Department of Defense. You are detaining a senior federal official without cause. You will stand down immediately or face obstruction charges." Jennings opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Merritt sneered, trying to recover control. "We had reason to believe she was impersonating—" "You had her ID," Maddox snapped now, inches away from Merritt's face. "You had federal travel orders with a Pentagon seal. You had everything you needed to know she outranked you 100 times over. But you didn't see her credentials. You saw her skin." Gasps rose from the small crowd. Several of the bystanders filming began whispering as Maddox continued, his voice a blend of controlled rage and absolute authority. "Remove her cuffs! Now!" Jennings fumbled with his keys, his hands suddenly trembling. He moved to Olivia, unlocking the restraints without looking her in the eye. As the metal dropped to the ground, Olivia slowly stood, her posture upright, eyes unreadable. She didn't flinch, didn't cry. She simply rolled her shoulders back, as if placing invisible epaulets of dignity back where they belonged. "Ma'am," Maddox said softer now. "Are you injured?" "No," Olivia replied, her voice flat and strong. "But my patience has been thoroughly assaulted." The Barksdale team stepped forward, forming a protective semicircle around her. Maddox turned once more to Merritt and Jennings. "You two are suspended from duty, effective immediately, pending full federal investigation. You are not to touch your vehicles, radios, or firearms. Hand over your sidearms. Now." Merritt's mouth hung open. "You can't." "I can," Maddox cut in, "and I just did." Behind him, another officer was already collecting evidence recordings from bystanders, footage from the gas station's dusty cameras, a full sweep of the scene. Everything would be logged. Every second scrutinized. Betty Rollins shrank from the window, disappearing into the shadows of her store. For the first time, the town of Deer Hollow felt its size small, exposed, and trembling under the weight of something far bigger than it was ready to handle. As Olivia was escorted to one of the SUVs, she paused. Her gaze swept the crowd, many still watching, unsure whether to clap, to nod, or just to go home and pretend none of this had happened. Her eyes met Maddox's, then returned to Merritt and Jennings. "You didn't just put your knee on my dignity," she said quietly. "You stomped on it with the confidence of men who thought no one would hold them accountable. That era ends today." Maddox opened the SUV door. Olivia stepped in without another word. As the convoy pulled away from Ben's Market, the silence left behind was louder than any siren. The town of Deer Hollow had been cracked open, and soon the whole country would see what spilled out. For a long second, no one moved. The wind rustled the tops of the pines surrounding Deer Hollow like distant thunder, but on the cracked pavement outside Ben's Market and Fuel Time froze. Officers Merritt and Jennings stood like men suddenly dropped into the wrong war, their hands trembling just above their holsters. Major General Olivia Dawson, now released from their grip, stood silent and composed between the heavily armed military escort that had descended like a hammer from heaven. Colonel James T. Maddox didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence alone, backed by the United States Army's weight, sucked the arrogance right out of the air. But for Merritt and Jennings, it was already too late. Their mistake had detonated far beyond the borders of Deer Hollow. The moment the cuffs had snapped onto Olivia Dawson's wrists, a teenage bystander named Talia Monroe had started recording. Her phone captured it, all the calm dignity of the woman stating her name and rank, the way the officers sneered and shoved her against the vehicle, and the loud clatter of a still-connected secure phone hitting the concrete. Within minutes, Talia had posted the clip on every platform she had. By the time the military convoy arrived, the video had already gone viral under the hashtag Dawson in Deer Hollow. Inside the Pentagon, Lieutenant Marcus Hale stared grimly at the feed as it played across multiple screens in the command center. Beside him, Colonel Elaine Rivers had gone rigid, her jaw clenched so tightly she could have bitten through steel. "This isn't just a breach," she said. "It's a national embarrassment." Security footage, cell phone videos, and audio fragments from the secure line had all begun to form a damning mosaic. The Pentagon's official statement was being drafted even before Olivia stepped into the back of the SUV that would escort her to Redstone Arsenal's medical facility. Colonel Maddox made it clear to the press that federal charges were under review. "We are conducting a formal investigation," he said with a gaze that could slice glass. "The treatment of Major General Dawson will not be ignored or explained away. Accountability will be swift and public." As the military vehicles disappeared into the horizon, the officers were left standing in a hollow silence. Merritt looked older by the second. The bitterness that had once made him cruel now made him small. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time in years, he looked like a man who understood consequences. Jennings, however, paced like a caged animal. "They blindsided us," he muttered, still refusing to admit that their actions weren't a fluke, they were a pattern. They'd seen a black woman with authority and assumed threat. They hadn't just misjudged. They had profiled, humiliated, and endangered a national asset. The fallout spread like wildfire. That evening, the mayor of Deer Hollow, Shirley Weathers, stood beside Police Chief Carl Landon at a hastily assembled press conference in front of Town Hall. The podium was too low, the microphones too many, and the questions far too sharp for anyone to hide behind small-town charm. Chief Landon, a man built like an oak tree, but nervous as a leaf in a storm, stumbled through a weak apology. "We regret the incident involving General Dawson," he mumbled, wiping sweat from his brow beneath a trucker's hat. "We are cooperating fully with federal authorities." But the press wasn't buying it. Reporters from CNN, MSNBC, and even Al Jazeera had descended on the town like a storm system. One correspondent from the Associated Press asked Chief Landon, was race a factor in the initial call and response? Another followed up. How many similar incidents have occurred in Deer Hollow without the benefit of a viral video? Landon blustered about procedure and misunderstanding, but the damage was done. Behind him, Mayor Weathers looked pale and furious, her whispered words caught by a live mic. "We're going to burn for this." By midnight, Olivia Dawson's name was trending globally. Veterans organizations issued statements of outrage. A petition calling for the immediate suspension of Merritt and Jennings crossed 200,000 signatures before dawn. Civil rights leaders, retired generals, and sitting Congress members posted statements of support. More than one national newspaper declared her arrest a modern-day Rosa Parks moment in uniform. At Redstone Arsenal, Olivia sat quietly on the edge of a hospital cot, while a medic tended to the deep red marks on her wrists. She hadn't cried. She hadn't raised her voice. But there was a hollow ache behind her eyes, a fatigue that ran deeper than any bruise. Colonel Maddox stood nearby, arms crossed tightly, his jaw ticking. "You should rest," he said gently. Olivia looked at him. "I will, after the world hears the truth." That truth came 36 hours later at a press conference held in the federal building in Huntsville. Olivia walked in wearing her dress blues, her medals polished, her hair pulled back into a tight bun. Cameras clicked, lights flashed, and the room buzzed with anticipation. She took the podium like she'd taken command countless times before, without apology, without hesitation. "My name is Major General Olivia Dawson," she began. "I've spent 30 years defending this country at home and abroad. On Monday morning, while on official orders to Redstone Arsenal, I was handcuffed, shoved, and humiliated in front of strangers because someone assumed that a black woman with a secure phone must be suspicious. That assumption, rooted in fear, in bias, and in ignorance, could have cost lives." Her voice didn't shake once. She didn't speak for revenge. She spoke for dignity. "I do not speak today as a victim," she continued. "I speak as a leader, as a citizen, as someone who has seen firsthand what silence costs. I will not be silent." Across the nation, people watched in awe. In barber shops and classrooms, on couches and phones, people replayed her words again and again. The internet lit up with stories from other veterans, from black women in leadership, from ordinary Americans who'd experienced the same reflexive doubt, the same erasure. What happened in Deer Hollow had opened a wound that ran deep. The consequences weren't just reputational, they were structural. Within a week, the Department of Justice launched an inquiry into the Deer Hollow Police Department's conduct and hiring practices. Merritt and Jennings were suspended without pay pending criminal investigation. Paula Rollins, the store clerk, whose 911 call ignited the chain reaction, tried to delete her social media accounts, but not before the recording of her call had already gone viral. Acting erratic, she'd claimed, might be on drugs. Those words haunted every interview, every panel, every editorial. She disappeared from public view, but the reckoning had already arrived. Inside Deer Hollow, something began to shift. Local pastor Reverend Curtis Bell called for town hall meetings and accountability forums. Students at the high school organized a silent protest, marching with duct tape over their mouths and cardboard signs reading, "Am I suspicious too?" A retired police officer, disgusted by what he saw, returned his badge in protest and went on record. "This isn't new, it's just finally visible." But even in the eye of the storm, Olivia Dawson never lost her composure. She continued her briefings at Redstone. She met with Pentagon leadership. She testified before the House Armed Services Committee about the incident's national implications. Still, she never let the headlines define her. Because Deer Hollow had made a mistake, but Olivia was going to make history. By sunrise, Deer Hollow was no longer just a quiet whisper along the map of Alabama. It was a name on every morning show, every news crawl, every trending feed. The footage, just 87 seconds long, had already been viewed over 2 million times. A woman in plain clothes, graying hair, tied-back voice, measured palms open, calmly stating she was Major General Olivia Dawson of the United States Army, presenting identification with poise and restraint. And then the footage turned. Her credentials slapped from her hands, her wrists yanked behind her, her secure phone clattering against the concrete, as two officers pressed her to the hood of a rental car, with the kind of force usually reserved for fugitives or threats. But Olivia had been neither, and the country saw it. Veterans groups were among the first to speak. The National Association of Retired Officers issued a statement within hours, condemning the treatment of one of their own. Major General Dawson is a hero. This disgraceful incident cannot be passed off as misunderstanding. It is an affront to the ideals she has sworn to defend for over 3 decades. Civil rights organizations followed. The NAACP's Southern Region Chair called it a brutal collision between racism and unchecked authority. Legal coalitions from Atlanta to D.C. began circling the town like watchful hawks. What stunned the country even more than the video was Olivia's restraint, her silence, her dignity, even while surrounded by men who mocked her identity. She hadn't shouted, hadn't struggled. She had done everything right. And that fact ignited something raw across the nation. If they could do that to her, what hope was there for anyone else? At the Department of Justice, Assistant Attorney General Clara Singh announced a full civil rights probe into the Deer Hollow Police Department. Within a day, DOJ lawyers were on the ground interviewing townsfolk, pulling police records, reviewing complaints long buried in dusty file cabinets. The scrutiny was immediate and intense. On CNN, MSNBC, even Fox News split screens showed the footage of Olivia being detained next to photos of her in uniform, saluting, shaking hands with presidents standing beside troops in Kandahar, Baghdad, Ramadi. The dissonance was too stark to ignore. She served this country with distinction. One anchor said during a primetime segment, her voice trembling, "And this is how we honor her." A White House statement followed within 48 hours. President Adair has been briefed on the incident involving Major General Olivia Dawson and is monitoring developments closely. The administration supports a thorough federal investigation and accountability for any and all misconduct. In Deer Hollow, Chief Raymond Clevenger, an aging officer with a fondness for camouflage baseball caps and gut-level politics, stood red-faced before a row of microphones outside the courthouse. He wore his badge like armor, but looked utterly out of place amid the satellite trucks and polished reporters. "We, regret what happened," he muttered, sweat trickling from his temples as the air grew thick with expectation. "Our officers were responding to a call. They didn't know who she was at the time." A young reporter from Birmingham stepped forward. "Chief Clevenger," she presented military ID. She stated her rank. "Are you suggesting your officers believed a 4-star general's ID was fabricated?" Clevenger blinked, lost in the harsh lens of scrutiny. Well, it was tense. They had to make a judgment call. Another voice cut in. Or a snap judgment based on race. The questions surged. The chief's answers pattered. Meanwhile, Olivia stayed silent. She declined every interview request. She turned away from cameras outside the military hospital where she was being evaluated for deep bruises across both wrists and a swollen shoulder. But inside the base, she was coordinating, preparing, waiting for the right moment to speak, not for revenge, but for reckoning. Betty Rollins, the woman who had made the 911 call, had gone to ground. Reporters who knocked on the back door of her home on Old Hickory Lane were met with silence. Neighbors whispered that she hadn't shown up for her shift at Ben's Market since the day of the arrest. Someone had scrawled "shame" on the market's back wall in red spray paint. The town was split between those who muttered that she'd done what she thought was right, and those who now crossed the street to avoid being seen with her. As for Officers Duke Merritt and Cole Jennings, they had vanished from view entirely, suspended without pay pending investigation. Their personnel files, leaked by a whistleblower, showed disturbing patterns. Complaints ignored racial bias. Training marked incomplete, a culture of casual aggression. Merritt had been reprimanded twice for excessive force. Jennings had only been on the force for 2 years, but had already drawn internal concern for profiling. The footage had exposed something bigger than a single mistake. It revealed a system that had quietly thrived in Deer Hollow for generations. By the end of the week, Alabama's governor, Marjorie Trent, stood before a podium in Montgomery. A Republican with military roots and a cautious tongue, she surprised even her critics when she said plainly, "What happened to Major General Olivia Dawson is a stain on this state. No rank, no race, no human being should be subjected to humiliation under the law. We are launching a comprehensive review of policing practices in rural departments, effective immediately. Social media swelled with support. Hashtags like "I stand with Olivia" and "Her honor, her service" trended nationwide. Veterans posted their own stories of being mistaken for less than they were. Mothers posted about their fear. Soldiers in uniform posted selfies with signs that read, "She fought for us. Now we fight for her." But Olivia didn't need anyone to fight for her. She was waiting, and the world was about to hear from her on her terms. The Alabama sun was unrelenting that afternoon, casting long, hot beams over the manicured lawn outside Redstone Arsenal. Dozens of news crews, camera operators, and sound technicians moved about with hurried precision, setting up beneath white tents and adjusting lenses, boom mics, and live stream feeds. The entire country was watching now. What had begun as a quiet humiliation in a gravel parking lot had ignited a storm that reached from small-town Alabama all the way to Capitol Hill. And at the center of it stood a woman many Americans had only just come to know, Major General Olivia Dawson. She appeared just after noon, emerging from the towering gates of the base in full dress uniform. Her posture was as upright and unwavering as it had been in every combat zone she'd ever commanded. Her ribbons were aligned, polished to perfection, catching glints of light like a row of hard-earned stars. A crisp breeze carried the edge of her service coat as she stepped onto the podium, flanked by 2 military aides and followed closely by Colonel James T. Maddox. The murmurs of the crowd died away, replaced by a silence thick with anticipation. It wasn't just reporters in attendance. Now veterans had arrived in droves, many in faded uniforms or hats, bearing the insignia of long-past wars. Civil rights leaders stood near the front, some with arms folded tight across their chests, others holding signs that read, "Dignity is not a uniform, and we stand with Olivia." She didn't begin with a smile. She didn't scan the audience for familiar faces or pause to gather her thoughts. She simply gripped the sides of the podium with 2 steady hands and began to speak, her voice cutting clean through the buzz of cameras and the weight of recent days. "My name is Major General Olivia Dawson. I have worn this uniform for over 30 years. I have served Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, and several places I can't name without violating federal law. I have commanded battalions, advised presidents, and signed deployment orders that sent brave men and women into harm's way." She paused. The weight of her words settled over the crowd like a second sun. But none of that mattered last week. The silence deepened. You could hear the rustle of a notepad, the distant creak of a camera swivel. None of it mattered, she continued to 2 officers in Deer Hollow, Alabama, who saw a black woman on a phone call in civilian clothes and assumed I was a criminal. I was not treated like a general. I was not treated like a citizen. I was treated like a threat because of what I look like. She exhaled slowly, but didn't look away from the cameras. That must change. The crowd didn't erupt. Not yet. The room America was still listening. When I was taken into custody, I said nothing inflammatory. I didn't resist. I complied with every order. I presented my credentials, military ID, and federal orders. They were torn from my hands. I was mocked, handcuffed, humiliated. And the only thing more dangerous than that kind of power is the silence that usually follows it. Her voice wavered slightly, but never broke. I am here today because I refuse to be silent. I will not let my service or the service of any person in uniform be used as a shield for injustice. We wear this cloth not to be above the law, but never to be beneath its protection either. Now the crowd stirred. Not wild applause yet, but the shift in energy was palpable. I want to speak especially to those who've worn this uniform like I have. We are trained to follow orders, to serve with integrity, to uphold the Constitution. But that oath means we must also call out injustice when it appears in our ranks, in our towns, and in ourselves. Her gaze moved across the field. She saw tears, tight jaws, cameras rolling. She didn't blink. I am not the first to experience this, and I won't be the last. But let this moment be the one we stop pretending that patriotism and prejudice can live in the same body. Then came a slight lean into the mic. I did not ask to become a symbol. I did not plan to be part of a viral video. But if this is the moment I've been called to meet, I will meet it in full. The applause began first from a few, then a swell. A wave. Because somewhere a young girl who looks like me will watch that video and ask herself if her dreams are worth the risk. And I want her to know that yes, they are. And yes, this country can be hers too, but only if we make it so. She stepped back. Just a few inches. The applause rose higher. Not polite clapping, not obligatory cheers, but a storm of hands pounding together, a groundswell of respect that moved through the press corps. The veterans, the students, the onlookers watching from their porches and phones and street corners across America. Colonel Maddox stepped forward to offer brief closing remarks, but it was clear that the day belonged to Olivia. He didn't speak long, only reiterated that a full federal investigation was underway, that accountability would be pursued to its full legal conclusion, and that Major General Dawson would be fully supported by the Department of Defense and the Department of Justice alike. But it was Olivia who lingered in every lens. Every click of a shutter caught her standing tall, not as someone who had been broken, but as someone who had refused to break. As someone who had looked injustice in the eye and spoken without flinching. By that evening, her speech had aired on every major news network. Social media threads lit up with hashtags like #I stand with Olivia and #Dignity in uniform. Civil rights lawyers praised her clarity. Military historians called her words among the most important public addresses by a uniformed officer in modern history. And in Deer Hollow, the silence was deafening. Police Chief Tom Sutter canceled his Friday fishing trip and issued a new internal review. The mayor, pressed by every news outlet in the state, finally emerged from City Hall to call the incident deeply regrettable. But the words were hollow, and everyone knew it. Back at Redstone Arsenal, Olivia took off her uniform that night alone in her quarters. She placed it gently on the hanger, her medals still catching faint reflections of the room's single reading lamp. She looked at her hands reddened still from where the cuffs had pinched her wrists, and then looked at her face in the mirror. Not to admire it, not to question it, but to mark the moment. History had tried to silence her in a gas station parking lot. She had answered with a microphone, a uniform, and the unshakable dignity of truth. In the stillness that followed the storm, long after the podium had been cleared and the applause had faded into echoes across the Alabama pine fields, Major General Olivia Dawson sat alone in her quarters at Redstone Arsenal, finally allowed a moment with her own thoughts. The crisp navy of her uniform hung beside her, still carrying the weight of the moment. The ribbons and stars didn't feel heavier, but they felt different. Changed. Not diminished, but tempered, like steel in fire. She reached for her notebook. Not the official reports or legal briefs stacked in neat towers by the door, but a worn leather journal she'd carried through deployments and diplomacy alike. She opened it to a fresh page and began to write, not for the public, not for the press, but for the people who would never see that stage. People who bore similar scars, though theirs never made headlines. What happened in Deer Hollow, she began, was not new. It was not shocking. It was the echo of a very old song. Her pen moved slowly, deliberately. I have spent decades serving a nation that I love, wearing a uniform that demands respect, not just for me, but for the ideals it's supposed to represent. But that day none of it mattered. Not my rank, not my oath, not the decades I'd given to protect the freedoms of people who couldn't see past my skin. She paused, her hand hovering midair. Her voice, even in her thoughts, did not tremble. And I still believe. She rose, her shadow, stretching long in the fading evening sun that spilled through the blinds. Across the base, the world kept moving. Helicopters buzzed faintly in the distance, and the quiet hum of duty rolled on. But inside Olivia, something had shifted, not broken, not surrendered, but transformed. The humiliation, the cold metal of handcuffs that bit into her wrists, the eyes that refused to see her, all of it could have become poison. But instead, it became purpose. In her voiceover broadcast weeks later, in a nationally televised segment titled Service and Silence, An American Reckoning, her words were calm, steady, and unsparing. I know what they saw that day. A black woman alone, speaking into a device they didn't understand. They didn't see a soldier. They didn't see a citizen. They saw a threat. The footage of her being pressed against her car, of her credentials being tossed like garbage, played in muted slow motion behind her words. But I wasn't alone. Because for every person like me who gets a headline and a hearing, there are thousands more who don't. Who vanish into silence because there was no uniform, no camera, no rescue. The nation had responded. Some with shame, others with shock, and still others with defiance. But what mattered to Olivia was the flood of letters from young servicewomen, from retired nurses, teachers, single mothers, warehouse workers, delivery drivers, security guards, black, brown, Asian immigrant, queer, every one of them whispering the same unspoken truth: I saw myself in you. That more than the press conferences or Pentagon promises is what stayed with her. And yet change had only just begun. Investigations were underway, and reforms were being drafted. Deer Hollow's police department had been placed under federal review, its budget suspended until it completed a full overhaul of training and community oversight. Officers Merritt and Jennings were facing both civil litigation and DOJ action. But Olivia knew real change didn't come from lawsuits. It came from truth told plainly in uncomfortable places. From saying what everyone fears to say out loud. This system is not broken. It was built this way. In the final voiceover, Olivia looked straight into the camera, not as a general, not as a symbol, but as a woman who had stood still while her dignity was stripped in front of strangers and still chose to stand again. We are not asking for special treatment. We are demanding equal humanity. The uniform should have spoken for me. But when it didn't, my voice had to. And yours can too. She closed her journal, its final line reading, "Change doesn't wait for permission. It begins when someone, somewhere refuses to stay silent." And then she stood, shoulders square, spine unyielding, not because she had not been shaken, but because she had chosen not to be moved by fear. The story of Major General Olivia Dawson is not just a single event in a single town. It is a mirror held up to the soul of America. It is a wake-up call for every citizen who has ever believed that uniform merit or honor could insulate a person from racial bias. If a decorated general can be handcuffed, humiliated, and doubted simply for being a black woman in the wrong zip code, then what does that say about the safety of everyday people without rank medals or visibility? What happened in Deer Hollow is not fiction. It's a blueprint, painfully familiar, for how dignity is stripped in broad daylight. It teaches us that racism doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers through a clerk's phone call or a cop's dismissive glance. And it warns us that silence, even from well-meaning witnesses, is a choice that carries consequences. But Olivia Dawson also teaches us something else, the power of grace under fire. Her restraint was not weakness, it was discipline. Her calm was not compliance, it was clarity. And her voice, when she finally chose to raise it, shook a nation awake. So what do we as American citizens take from this? We must learn to look beyond the surface, to question what we've been taught about who looks like they belong, to challenge systems that protect bias under the guise of procedure. We must demand better from our leaders, our officers, our communities, and most of all, from ourselves. Change starts not in courtrooms or Capitol buildings, but in the everyday courage of speaking up when others look away. And that's where you come in. If this story moved you, if you felt that lump in your throat, that heat in your chest, don't let that energy fade. Subscribe to this channel, because here we tell the stories others try to silence. We shine light where others prefer shadows. And we give voice to the countless people who've been told to sit down, stay quiet, and wait their turn. Like this video, if you believe dignity should never depend on how someone looks. Share this story with your friends, your co-workers, your communities. Share it not because it's trending, but because it's truth. The kind of truth that can't be ignored anymore. Olivia Dawson stood up for herself, but she stood up for all of us too. Now it's our turn to stand with her. So speak up, push back, refuse to let injustice breathe comfortably. And remember, change doesn't begin in the halls of power. It begins with one person in one moment deciding that silence is no longer an option. Be that person. Let this be your moment. Subscribe, like, share, and never stay silent again.